Imagine this: a financial world shaken to its core, headlines filled with fear, people lining up outside banks unsure if their savings were still safe. It was late 2008, the peak of the global financial crisis, and trust, the invisible glue that held the economy together, was crumbling. Banks had failed, governments were scrambling, and ordinary people were left with questions no one seemed able to answer. In that chaotic backdrop, quietly and without fanfare, a 9-page white paper appeared on a small cryptography mailing list. Its title was simple, almost plain: Bitcoin, a peer to peer electronic cash system. And at the bottom, signing that document, was a name history had never seen before: Satoshi Nakamoto. There was no photo attached, no biography, no credentials, no personal story, no grand introduction. Just a name, one that could belong to anyone or no one at all. Some dismissed the paper as just another internet experiment. Others downloaded it out of curiosity. Few at that moment realized they were witnessing the birth of what would become the most powerful digital currency the world had ever known. Fewer still could imagine that this unknown figure, whoever he or perhaps they were, would soon disappear completely, leaving behind a technology capable of reshaping the future of money. Who created Bitcoin? And more importantly, why did he create it? These questions are like doors no one has fully opened, mysteries wrapped inside technology, philosophy, and human intent. The deeper you go, the more intriguing the story becomes. Bitcoin did not emerge from a flashy Silicon Valley conference or a billionaire's laboratory. It appeared like a whisper, subtle yet revolutionary, a seed planted in digital soil destined to grow beyond anyone's full control. The very existence of Bitcoin challenges something fundamental about modern life: the idea that money must be controlled by institutions, central banks, governments, or corporations. For centuries, money has needed trust and intermediaries. You trust the bank to store your savings. You trust the government not to print too much currency. You trust payment providers to move your funds from one person to another. Trust has always been a requirement. But what happens when trust fails? What happens when people begin to question the system itself? That is the world Bitcoin was born into. When the white paper was released, Satoshi didn't speak like someone seeking fame, investment, or credit. His tone was calm, methodical, almost reserved. He discussed cryptography, distributed networks, digital signatures, concepts far more familiar to mathematicians and developers than the general public. Yet underlying the technical language was something else, something harder to measure: an idea. An idea that money could exist without permission, without a central authority, without the vulnerability of human corruption. A system where rules were written in mathematics rather than politics. As the first lines of code were released in January 2009, the Bitcoin network came alive. Not with a roar, but with a quiet hum. The first block, later called the Genesis block, was mined by Satoshi himself. Embedded inside it was a message, something like a time capsule, referencing that very moment in history. The message read: "The Times 03 Jan 2009, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks." It was a headline from a British newspaper describing the financial crisis. But it was also a statement, subtle yet powerful. Some saw it as proof of Satoshi's frustration with the traditional banking system. Others saw it simply as a timestamp. Yet the meaning, intentional or not, resonated deeply. Bitcoin was born in response to a broken world. From that moment, a new chapter began. Developers joined Satoshi online, testing the system, running nodes, refining ideas. Transactions passed between early adopters like sparks catching dry grass. At first, each coin was worthless, just numbers on a screen, tokens of curiosity exchanged between strangers. But currency is a strange thing. It gains power when people believe in it, and belief began to spread. Forums became the birthplace of a community. Satoshi wrote messages, answered questions, listened to suggestions. He wasn't loud. He didn't push. He guided. His communication felt like someone who cared deeply about the architecture of a new world, but had no desire to stand in the spotlight of the old one. And the more people studied the system he built, the more they realized its elegance. Blocks linked like stories in a chain. No single authority could rewrite them. No one could change the rules without consensus. It was money without masters. But even as Bitcoin grew, Satoshi declined invitations to reveal himself. No interviews, no personal details, no confirmation of identity. In a world obsessed with faces, he remained faceless. In a world addicted to ownership, he gave ownership away. It was as if he wanted Bitcoin to walk on its own legs, free from the control or the mistakes of its creator. There is something almost mythical about that. In history, inventors often seek recognition. Scientists want credit. Entrepreneurs want reward. But Satoshi Nakamoto gave the world a tool worth billions, then stepped off the stage quietly. Some would call that genius. Others might call it madness. Yet perhaps it is exactly that absence which gives Bitcoin its aura, its sense of being bigger than any single individual. When we ask who created Bitcoin, we aren't just asking for a name. We are questioning the origin of a digital revolution. We are exploring the intersection of technology and philosophy, of economics and freedom. Bitcoin is not just code. It is a story, one that began in crisis, grew through community, and continues to challenge the foundation of money itself. And so to understand the creator, we must first understand the world he was responding to, the desperation, the broken trust, the hunger for something new. In the next chapter, we will travel back to those turbulent years, to the collapsing pillars of global finance, and discover why the birth of Bitcoin was not an accident, but perhaps an inevitable response to a system on the edge. To truly understand why Bitcoin was created, we must step back to the world before it existed, a world that appeared stable on the surface, yet was quietly cracking beneath the weight of its own design. The year was 2008, and the global economy was unraveling like a thread pulled from an old fabric. Banks had grown reckless, lending money they did not possess, building towers of debt upon fragile foundations. The complicated financial instruments they created, derivatives, subprime mortgages, bundled loans, looked solid until suddenly they weren't. What followed was a cascade of failures. Major banks collapsed. Giants like Lehman Brothers fell. Governments rushed to rescue financial institutions with taxpayers' money, hoping to prevent total collapse. For many, this was more than a crisis. It was a revelation. People saw, perhaps for the first time in decades, how vulnerable the system was. The money in their bank accounts wasn't truly theirs. It was part of an interconnected web controlled by institutions whose mistakes ordinary citizens had to pay for. Trust, once implicit, shattered. And amid that spreading uncertainty, a question began to form. What if money could function without these institutions? What if people could control their wealth directly without relying on banks or governments? It was during this storm of doubt and anger that Satoshi's white paper appeared. And although it was primarily technical, it offered a radical alternative. Instead of depending on banks to verify transactions, Bitcoin used cryptography and distributed computing. It proposed a network where anyone could participate, where transactions were transparent, and where no single authority could rewrite the rules at will. In short, Bitcoin was designed to operate like digital cash, peer-to-peer, borderless, permissionless. To understand how revolutionary that idea was, imagine two people sending each other money online before Bitcoin existed. You needed a bank or a payment platform to act as a middleman. That middleman had the power to approve or deny the transaction, charge fees, freeze accounts, or even reverse payments. With Bitcoin, the code itself became the judge and the ledger keeper. Once a transaction was added to the blockchain, it was final. No lawyer, no banker, no government official could undo it. It was freedom, coded into mathematics. The white paper outlined a solution to a long-standing problem in computer science known as the double spending problem. Digital files can be copied effortlessly. If money were just data, what would stop someone from duplicating it endlessly? Traditional systems solved this by having banks track balances. Satoshi instead proposed a decentralized network where thousands of nodes reached consensus on the state of the ledger. The blockchain made fraud extremely difficult, every block linked to the previous one, forming an unbreakable chain. To rewrite history, you'd need to overpower the majority of the network's computing power, an almost impossible task. But technology alone cannot create a movement. What gave Bitcoin life was the dissatisfaction simmering in society. People felt betrayed. They watched governments print money to bail out corporations, pushing inflation onto ordinary citizens. They began questioning why the value of their savings could be diluted by policies they had no say in. In that climate, Bitcoin was not just a system. It was a statement, a quiet rebellion encoded in lines of C++. The first adopters weren't investors or hedge funds. They were cypherpunks, cryptographers, libertarians, people who believed in privacy, freedom, and digital sovereignty. For them, Bitcoin was a dream made real, a currency outside the reach of institutions. One early supporter wrote that Bitcoin felt like the separation of money and state, a phrase that would later echo like a prophecy. Discussion forums became the heartbeat of the movement. People debated code, proposed improvements, tested nodes. Satoshi responded thoughtfully, not like a leader seeking authority, but like a builder seeking feedback. In those early conversations, you could feel the sense of exploration, like pioneers mapping a new continent. There was no roadmap, no funding, no marketing. Only curiosity, belief, and shared frustration with the old financial order. At the time, Bitcoin's value was practically zero. It was more an experiment than an asset. Yet something profound was happening. Slowly, people began to exchange Bitcoin not just for fun, but for real things. The famous story came in 2010 when Laszlo Hanyecz offered 10,000 BTC for 2 pizzas. Someone accepted. That transaction, trivial at the time, became the moment Bitcoin stepped out of theory and into reality. 10,000 coins for 2 pizzas, today worth hundreds of millions of dollars, an anecdote that feels unreal, that yet perfectly symbolic of how revolutions begin, quietly. The crisis of 2008 didn't cause Bitcoin, but it created the perfect environment for it to take root. Without the collapse of trust, perhaps few would have cared about a new kind of money. But when faith in banks trembled, Bitcoin offered a different path, not through protest, but through invention. It didn't ask permission. It simply existed, and as it existed, it grew. The next years would reveal more about the creator himself or themselves. A figure who contributed code tirelessly, wrote with caution and clarity, and then, once the creation became strong enough to stand alone, began to fade into the shadows. Who was this architect of digital freedom? Why hide? Why walk away from something so powerful, so potentially profitable? In the next part, we will follow that trail. We will examine everything known about Satoshi Nakamoto, emails, forum posts, fragments of personality hidden between lines of text. We will explore the theories, the rumors, the suspects. Because to understand Bitcoin's purpose, we must step closer to the person, or legend, who set it in motion. The deeper we travel into Bitcoin's history, the more one name rises like a ghost from the digital ether. Satoshi Nakamoto, a name that sounds Japanese, yet might not be. A person who changed global finance, yet may not exist as a single individual. A figure who communicated through emails, forums, lines of code, and then vanished without ever revealing a face or voice. To this day, no one knows for certain who Satoshi is. All we have are traces, footprints in the snow that lead just far enough to spark endless speculation, then disappear into white silence. Satoshi first appeared publicly on October 31, 2008, when he sent his Bitcoin white paper to a cryptography mailing list. His writing style was precise, technical, but polite, never arrogant. He responded to questions with calm patience, never pushing personal opinions beyond what was necessary. Those early emails give us the only glimpses we have into his personality. He seemed determined, but humble, intelligent, but careful. He collaborated with other developers, yet always kept his identity at arm's length. No personal stories, no location, no real-time communication that could expose time zones. Still, the clues are there if you look closely. For instance, his forum posts mostly appeared during hours that correspond to British business time rather than Japan's. His written English was fluent, sophisticated, even colloquial, not the English of someone translating from Japanese. His time zone settings on the early code repository hinted at GMT. Was he British? Or simply masking his real location? We don't know. That is the nature of legends. They offer more questions than answers. One of the earliest people to work directly with Satoshi was Hal Finney, a respected cryptographer and one of the first to run the Bitcoin software. Hal received the very first Bitcoin transaction from Satoshi. Some believe Hal might have been Satoshi himself or part of the team. Hal denied it, claiming he merely recognized brilliance and wanted to support it. When asked later, he said Satoshi communicated like a separate person, someone modest and careful. But to many, Hal remains a prime suspect, not because of evidence, but because of possibility. He had the skill, the values, and the timing. Then there is Nick Szabo, a pioneer in digital currency theory. Years before Bitcoin, Nick wrote about BitGold, a concept strikingly similar to Bitcoin. His philosophical writings about decentralized money match the spirit of Bitcoin almost perfectly. And yet Nick insists he is not Satoshi. Linguistic analysis found similarities, but correlation is not proof. Could Satoshi have built upon Nick's ideas? Or could Nick have created a separate identity to launch Bitcoin anonymously? The debate remains unresolved, fueling endless arguments across the internet. Another suspected figure once flipped the world's attention upside down. Dorian Nakamoto, a retired engineer living quietly in California. A journalist identified him as the possible Satoshi because of his surname and technical background. The media storm that followed was intense. Reporters camped outside his home. Cameras chased him as he drove his car. But in an interview, Dorian simply replied, "I am not involved in Bitcoin." He seemed confused by the entire situation, overwhelmed by sudden fame he never asked for. Most people now accept he was simply a coincidence, an ordinary man caught in an extraordinary misunderstanding. Others have been suspected. Adam Back, the inventor of Hashcash, a technology Bitcoin later used. Craig Wright, an Australian businessman who claimed boldly to be Satoshi, a claim rejected by most cryptographers due to lack of verifiable proof. Some say Satoshi is a collective of developers, not one individual. Others whisper that he might have been a government project, a myth, a ghost, a genius hiding in plain sight. But here's what makes the mystery so powerful. Satoshi didn't just hide who he was, he chose to leave. In 2010, as Bitcoin slowly gained attention, Satoshi reduced his involvement. He transferred control of the code repository to other developers. He stopped answering emails. His final known message, sent in 2011, was simple, almost anticlimactic. "I've moved on to other things." And just like that, he was gone. No farewell, no press release, no book deal, no attempt to profit from what he built. Satoshi holds around 1 million Bitcoins mined in the early days, coins that have never been moved. Not a single Satoshi spent. Even when Bitcoin reached prices worth billions, the wallets remained untouched. It is as if the creator set the machine into motion, then walked away, refusing the power and wealth he could have claimed. Why? That question hangs over Bitcoin's history like a shadow cast by an unseen figure. Some believe Satoshi left to ensure Bitcoin would survive. His presence might have made the system centralized, creating a cult of personality. By vanishing, he forced Bitcoin to grow as a community-driven network, not a kingdom under one king. Others think he feared attention or legal consequences. A decentralized currency threatens institutions, after all. But maybe, just maybe, Satoshi believed his invention should belong to the world, not to him. When we look at his writings, a philosophy begins to emerge. He spoke often about trustless systems, privacy, empowerment. He seemed disillusioned with the financial order, skeptical of centralized authority. His code and his comments reflect a mind driven not by ego, but by principle. Whoever he was, his identity is less important than the idea he unleashed. And yet, we keep wondering. We search his words for hints, decode his emails like archaeologists brushing dust from ancient pottery. Because Satoshi is more than a person. He is a modern myth, a symbol of what one anonymous individual can create when motivated by vision rather than fame. As the legend deepens, so does the ultimate question. Why did he do it? What was the true purpose behind Bitcoin? Was it rebellion, innovation, hope, strategy, or something more personal, something only Satoshi himself could understand? To find answers, we must now turn to the heart of this story, not the man, but the mission. In the next chapter, we explore the philosophy woven into the architecture of Bitcoin, the purpose encoded into every block, every transaction, every decentralized heartbeat of the network. Now that we've walked through the mystery of Satoshi's identity, it is time to step into the core of the story, the why. Technologies do not emerge without intention. Behind every invention lies frustration, inspiration, or a dream. Bitcoin is no exception. Its design is too deliberate, too elegant, too philosophically charged to be merely an academic experiment. To understand its purpose, we must examine what problems Satoshi aimed to solve and what vision he embedded into the protocol. If you read the Bitcoin white paper closely, you will see not just technical guidelines, but a manifesto hidden in plain sight. One of the earliest lines states that Bitcoin enables online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. That sentence alone contains a revolution. It rejects the centuries-long assumption that money requires intermediaries. Instead of banks validating transactions, the network itself validates them through consensus and proof of work. No gatekeepers, no permission required. In other words, Bitcoin decentralizes trust. Satoshi's writings show that he had a deep distrust of centralized systems. In forum posts, he noted that traditional currencies depend on the honesty of banks and governments, and honesty history has shown is often fragile. Money can be printed endlessly, accounts can be frozen, transactions censored, citizens carry the consequences of decisions they never approved. For Satoshi, decentralization was not just technical design, it was philosophical liberation. Bitcoin shifts power from institutions to individuals. Consider inflation. When central banks print more money, each existing unit loses value. Your savings quietly shrink. Bitcoin tackles this with a rule unchangeable without global consensus. Only 21 million BTC will ever exist. No politician can inflate it. No corporation can rewrite the supply. Bitcoin is digital scarcity, pure and absolute. It is gold for the internet age, mined not with shovels but with computation. Some even call it hard money, a currency immune to human decision-making. But Satoshi didn't stop at scarcity. He built transparency into Bitcoin's core. Every transaction is recorded publicly on the blockchain, visible to anyone. Ironically, in a world where banks hide mistakes, Bitcoin exposes everything. You cannot bribe the blockchain. You cannot beg it for exceptions. Code is law, and that lack of favoritism is what makes the system fair. Still, Bitcoin is not merely technology, it is social commentary. Remember the message in the Genesis block, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. It is hard to imagine that as coincidence. It reads like a quiet declaration, enough is enough. We need money that does not fail because humans fail. We need a system where no institution is too big to fail, where power cannot be abused through printing presses or political agendas. Bitcoin is not against governments. It simply reduces their monopoly over currency. For many, Bitcoin represents financial freedom, not freedom to avoid responsibility, but freedom to own one's wealth directly. In Bitcoin, you are your own bank. You control your private keys. No one can stop you from sending or receiving money. Not borders, not banks, not even Satoshi himself. That level of sovereignty is both empowering and intimidating. With freedom comes responsibility. Lose your keys, lose your coins. Bitcoin does not forgive mistakes because decentralization removes the parent figure who fixes them. Another purpose emerges when we examine global inequality. Billions of people live in countries where banking access is limited, where inflation eats savings, where governments control capital flow. To them, Bitcoin is not investment, it is lifeline, a store of value they can carry across borders, a tool that levels the playing field, a currency anyone can access with a phone signal. The child of crisis becomes hope for the overlooked. Satoshi once wrote, "The root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work." Bitcoin removes that requirement. It replaces trust in institutions with trust in mathematics. It replaces authority with consensus. It replaces opacity with transparency. Yet, one of the most profound aspects of Bitcoin's purpose lies in how Satoshi implemented his final act, disappearing. He did not claim ownership. He did not market Bitcoin as a product. He gave it to the world, then stepped back. His absence may be his final message. No leader, no single point of failure. A decentralized currency cannot rely on a central figurehead. Some believe he wanted Bitcoin to grow organically, like a forest without a gardener. Others believe he feared that fame would turn him into a target. But perhaps he simply wanted the invention to matter more than the inventor. In leaving, Satoshi became immortal, not as a person, but as an idea. Today, Bitcoin is many things depending on who you ask. To an investor, it is digital gold. To a developer, a breakthrough in distributed systems. To a dissident, a shield against censorship. To a philosopher, a social experiment redefining trust. Behind each interpretation lies a seed Satoshi planted. His purpose was not singular. It was layered like the blocks that form the chain. Bitcoin challenges our relationship with money. It invites us to question who controls value, who defines ownership, who decides what is fair. It forces us to consider a world where power is shared, not dictated. And in doing so, it becomes more than currency. It becomes movement. As Bitcoin spread, its influence rippled far beyond finance. New cryptocurrencies emerged. Blockchain became a field of study. Companies formed, regulations drafted, governments debated. What began as one anonymous white paper now shapes global policy and digital culture. The world changed, and it all started with a pseudonym and an idea. In the next chapter, we will explore Bitcoin's impact, how it evolved from a niche curiosity to a global phenomenon, how it disrupted industries, and how Satoshi's absence became both a mystery and a gift. We'll ask what his legacy means today and whether Bitcoin can thrive without knowing the face of its creator. Because the story is no longer just about who Satoshi was, it is about what he left behind. By now, we understand the world Bitcoin was born into, the mystery behind its creator, and the purpose that shaped its architecture. But perhaps the most extraordinary chapter in this story is what happened after Satoshi stepped away. No founder, no CEO, no marketing department. Yet the system continued to grow. Slowly at first, like a whisper spreading across the internet, then louder, then unstoppable. What began as an experiment became a movement, a global phenomenon, reshaping how we think about value, ownership, and trust. When Bitcoin entered the world, it did so quietly. Traded on forums, mined by hobbyists, dismissed by most economists as irrelevant. But as years passed, something curious happened. People began to believe. Not all at once, not in a rush, but gradually, like people discovering a treasure map and realizing the X might be real. Early adopters spread knowledge not through corporate campaigns, but through conversation, passion, curiosity. Bitcoin didn't sell itself. People fought for it, argued for it, built for it. In 2011 and 2012, developers expanded the code base. Exchanges appeared. People began trading fiat for Bitcoin. And for the first time, Bitcoin had a price. Tiny at first, then growing. Every year brought new milestones. Media coverage shifted from mockery to fascination. Bankers who once laughed began to discuss it in boardrooms. Hedge funds, then companies, then governments took notice. By 2017, Bitcoin had entered the mainstream vocabulary of the world. It climbed to thousands of dollars, then tens of thousands. A digital asset with no physical form, no central authority, no face behind it. Yet it captured global attention more fiercely than any currency in modern history. The legacy of Satoshi reveals itself not only in price charts, but in the ripple effect Bitcoin unleashed. Blockchain technology, once obscure, exploded into an entire industry. Thousands of cryptocurrencies emerged, some inspired by Satoshi's vision, others straying from it. Smart contract platforms appeared, decentralized finance systems, NFT marketplaces. Whether one loves or criticizes them, it is undeniable. Without Bitcoin, this ecosystem would not exist. It was the spark that ignited a revolution, yet Bitcoin remains unique. It is the first, the most decentralized, the most secure network in existence. It is the only one whose creator never profited publicly, never influenced its development for personal gain. In a world of founders seeking spotlight, Satoshi's disappearance became part of the mythology, proof that power could be relinquished. Bitcoin belongs not to one nation, not to one corporation, not to one person. It belongs to its users. It is a currency without a king. But power without a ruler creates tension. Bitcoin's community has debated fiercely over scaling, block size, privacy features. Hard forks split the chain. But through every conflict, one principle stood firm. No one voice can dominate unless the network agrees. Decisions move slowly because consensus takes time, but that slowness is strength, not weakness. It prevents rash changes. It protects stability. It ensures Bitcoin's foundation remains what Satoshi intended: decentralized, resilient, politically neutral. Consider the symbolism. While other cryptocurrencies have founders who tweet, speak, influence markets, Bitcoin has only silence. That silence forces people to think, discuss, decide together. It is almost poetic. The absence of a leader inspires collaboration rather than obedience. Bitcoin's impact stretches beyond finance into philosophy. It challenges the idea that central authorities must control currency. It questions the fairness of inflation, the fragility of trust, the power imbalance within global banking. It offers a new model: money as a protocol, not a promise. Money backed by math, not politics. For some, that represents liberation. For others, a threat. Governments debate how to regulate it. Some embrace, some resist. Yet Bitcoin continues, indifferent to approval or rejection. It does not ask permission. It simply exists. Look at countries facing inflation: Argentina, Venezuela, Turkey. Citizens there turn to Bitcoin not as speculation, but survival. They save in BTC because their currency loses value daily. Bitcoin gives them an escape, a store of wealth independent of domestic instability. In places where banking is limited, Bitcoin gives access to global finance with nothing more than a phone. It becomes not only a system for the privileged, but a lifeline for the underserved. Businesses now accept Bitcoin. Public companies buy it as treasury reserves, ETFs form, laws adapt. The financial world, once dismissive, now negotiates with the idea it could not stop. Banks that laughed now invest. Governments that ignored now legislate. Whether embraced or fought, Bitcoin forces systems to evolve. And through it all, Satoshi remains absent, yet present in every block mined, every transaction processed, every wallet created. His digital fingerprints live in the Genesis code, untouched, unspent. Imagine it: a creator who holds billions in potential wealth, but never moved a single coin. Not one. The most valuable invention of the century, and he walked away. This is not the behavior of a typical entrepreneur. It feels more like the work of someone who saw himself as a messenger, not a beneficiary. Someone who believed the world needed Bitcoin more than he needed recognition. His disappearance may be his greatest act. If Satoshi remained, Bitcoin might have been centralized around him. Governments could pressure, corporations could influence, believers could idolize. Without Satoshi, Bitcoin became leaderless by design, just as the protocol intended. A self-sustaining organism, a network immune to political pressure because it has no head to cut. A legacy not of fame, but of empowerment. And so, as we look at Bitcoin's impact, its adoption, its controversy, its cultural footprint, we see that the true legacy of Satoshi is not just digital currency. It is a shift in worldview, a reminder that individuals can challenge systems, that code can create trust where institutions failed, that ideas can outlive their creators. But now we turn to something more personal: your perspective, my perspective, how this story resonates beyond facts and history. Because every great story has a human reflection at its end. In the final section, we will step away from analysis and speak from the heart. What does the mystery of Satoshi really mean? What does Bitcoin represent beyond technology and finance? What feeling remains after understanding the magnitude of this creation? In the next part, I will share a personal reflection, an honest, subjective interpretation of this remarkable narrative. As I sit with everything we've explored, the history, the theories, the motivations, the legacy, there's one realization that becomes stronger than anything else. Maybe the most beautiful thing about Bitcoin lies not only in what it is, but in the mystery surrounding the person who created it. The more I think about Satoshi Nakamoto, the more I understand that his absence shaped Bitcoin just as much as his invention did. It wasn't just code left behind. It was a philosophy, a challenge. A mirror held up to our trust in institutions and our belief in what money should be. It is a strange feeling, almost poetic, to reflect on a global monetary system worth trillions of dollars and realize that its founder simply disappeared. No interviews, no book tours, no corporate takeover, no attempt to put a face on a movement. Satoshi could have become one of the most powerful figures in modern finance. He could have held keynotes, run a billion-dollar foundation, shaped policy, influenced governments. Instead, he walked away. And that choice speaks louder than any white paper ever could. When I think about why he may have done it, I imagine a person who understood human nature deeply. Someone who saw what happens when power accumulates in the hands of one. Someone who believed that for Bitcoin to be truly free, it could not be attached to a hero, a savior, a single authority figure. Because if Bitcoin had an identifiable leader, governments would target him. Followers would worship him. Markets would depend on his decisions. The system would bend towards centralization, the exact opposite of its purpose. In that sense, Satoshi's greatest contribution may not have been creating Bitcoin. It may have been letting it go. And here's where my personal reflection becomes more intimate. I ask myself a simple question: would Bitcoin be what it is today if Satoshi had stayed? Part of me thinks no. The myth, the legend, the anonymity, all of it adds a layer of neutrality. Bitcoin is not about who created it, it's about who uses it. It belongs to no one, and therefore to everyone. In a world obsessed with authorship, with credit, with recognition, Satoshi's silence is an act of rebellion. Sometimes I imagine him watching quietly from a distance, seeing Bitcoin grow, evolve, struggle, and flourish. Maybe he smiles when nations debate it. Maybe he shakes his head when influencers exploit it. Maybe he feels proud seeing people in unstable economies use it as hope, not speculation. Or perhaps he no longer follows it at all, the way an artist sometimes releases a piece and never looks back. There is also something profoundly human about our obsession with uncovering his identity. We want a face to attach to history. We want someone to thank, someone to blame, someone to admire. But maybe Bitcoin teaches us that ideas can be bigger than individuals. Maybe progress doesn't always need an author in the spotlight. In an age where social media pushes everyone toward visibility, anonymity itself becomes powerful. There is freedom in being unknown. I think about the future too. What happens if Satoshi returns one day? What if an old forum account suddenly posts a message? What if coins from the Genesis wallet move? The world would pause. Headlines would explode. Markets would convulse. Yet deep inside, I believe the story is more meaningful if he never comes back. Not because we don't want answers, but because the mystery forces us to focus on the invention, not the inventor. For me personally, the story of Satoshi is also a lesson in intention. He didn't create Bitcoin to get rich. He didn't seek fame. He didn't attempt to control its destiny. He created something transformative and set it free. In a world where most people want something in return, his actions remind us that true innovation sometimes comes from service, not profit, from belief, not ego. It inspires me to think about the value of ideas, how one idea, written in a simple white paper, could ripple across the world and challenge centuries of financial tradition. It makes me wonder how many other Satoshis exist among us, quietly building, writing code at night, working not for applause, but for impact. It makes me believe that the next revolution may already be drafted in someone's notebook, waiting to be shared. When people debate who Satoshi is, I don't feel the urge to solve the puzzle anymore. The name, the face, the biography, those are details. What matters is what Bitcoin has already become, a conversation about freedom, about trust, about the future of money. A reminder that ordinary individuals can change history without permission. And so my personal conclusion is simple. Satoshi Nakamoto is both a person and an idea. The person may be gone, but the idea remains, and it grows every time someone buys Bitcoin, not just as an investment, but as a statement. Every time a government questions it, every time a bank fears it, every time a young developer reads the white paper and feels something spark in their mind, Satoshi lives. Not in flesh, but in code. Not in identity, but in possibility. Who created Bitcoin, and what was his purpose? We may never know the full story, but maybe the purpose was never to be known. Maybe the goal was to step aside and let the world decide what Bitcoin would become. And in that quiet absence, Satoshi achieved something unexpectedly profound. He made Bitcoin bigger than himself. He turned money into a movement. In the end, perhaps the most meaningful tribute we can give him is not to uncover his identity, but to carry forward the vision of a financial world where power is distributed, where trust is mathematical, where innovation is open source, and where one person, no matter how ordinary, can ignite something extraordinary. And that, to me, is the legacy of Satoshi Nakamoto. Not a name in history, but a spark that continues to burn.